Good evening, everybody that is watching this, and welcome to another one of the Young Trustees Movement's question and answer sessions. Today we are focusing on and giving you some tips about how to get your board on board to having young trustees, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Bill and Allison, who I won't say any more about because I'll invite them to introduce themselves. So Bill, over to you first.
Sure, thank you very much, Leon. So I'm Bill Yuksel. I'm a lay trustee at Wolverhampton Student Union. I'm also the West Midlands Ambassador for the Young Trustee Movement, and for my day job, I'm a business manager at Abertay Partners, who are a not-for-profit recruitment company.
Thanks, Bill. And Allison, over to you.
Hi, my name's Allison Howe. I'm Head of Governance at the Nspcc, and it's my job to support the whole Board of Trustees and ensure that they carry out their roles. And we are also currently recruiting a young trustee.
Great, thank you. And Bill, you mentioned in your introduction that you're a lay trustee. Can you just try and define that a little bit for people who are watching this, but in particular with relation to the SU movement?
Yes, absolutely, thanks. So in relation to being a lay trustee, a student union board is quite a unique setup in the charity sector. So it has student sabbatical officers who are elected individuals for a year at a time who are on the board often. Normally they have student trustees and they also have lay trustees. So lay trustees are slightly different because they're external to the organisation, and I suppose similar to a trustee of any other board where you're volunteering your time, you normally have set skills and you're external to the organisation.
Okay, great. And Alison, in your introduction there, you mentioned that the Nspcc is currently recruiting for a young trustee. Can you tell us a little bit more about the sort of definition you're working with there for young trustee, and can you talk us through why at this stage the Nspcc has decided to do this?
Yeah, so we're looking for a trustee between the ages of 18 to 25. They need to be 18 because for legal reasons. And the reason we're doing this now, we're actually a bit behind the curve, I think, in terms of bringing young people into the heart of our decision making. We had a chair until a year ago who thought that in order to be a trustee, people had to be really experienced, well connected, that sort of thing. We've now got a new chair who's really keen to bring young people to the heart of our decision making. And in order to bridge that gap, we're going out for a young trustee now. Ultimately, we hope to have a far more diverse board that consists, sort of numbers of younger people than we've currently got. So this is really a stepping stone to push that.
Okay, and who floated the idea? Where did it come from? Because one of the things that people watching this often struggle with is trying to convince their board to recruit young trustees, and normally that needs a champion to go onto the board and say, this is the right thing to do, and here are all the benefits of getting young trustees. How did the process come about? What was the starting point?
I've been at the Nspcc for 3 years, and I was surprised that most of our trustees are well over the age of 45. And I've been championing this since I started. As I say, the previous chair didn't think it was a viable idea because he was very set in his ways. But it was really the new chair coming on board and wanting to, as I say, his first major speech to the organisation at the annual council meeting when he was elected was that his #1 priority was to put young people at the heart of our decision making.
And I'm going to bring Bill in here. And Bill, I want you to focus on not your experience of SUs, because I think in your introduction you sort of mentioned that SUs are pretty unique in the fact that all of them have young trustees through the elected officer process and through external appointments too. But have you come across the situation that Alison's describing, where a chair or chief exec has doubted or even been suspicious about the ideas of young trustees? And if so, how do you combat that?
Yes, sadly it does happen, and there are a number of individuals which we see which are often earlier in their career and sometimes can be under 30, so young trustees, and sometimes people will not, even if they've been trustees before, people will still be sceptical about their experience. Age diversity is really important on boards, and as Allison highlighted, often trustees are well over 45. Often there are many boards out there where the average age is over 55. And, diversity of thought is really important. I think for any board, they do need to be looking at age diversity, and they really need to think about what experiences and skills and insights that they may be missing, because young people, particularly at the moment, the last 20 or so years have been a completely different set of experiences to grow up in, throughout global recessions, political uncertainty, heightened states of terrorism and everything else. And people that grew up with that environment will bring a unique and very helpful perspective to a board to help round off that diversity of thought and thinking.
Okay. And if we fast forward a little bit, and I think it would be great to bring you both in on this, what would be your advice to somebody who is a new young trustee? So Alison, if we fast forward 3 or 4 months and you've got your appointed young trustee at the Nspcc, they go to their first board meeting and they feel like some members of their board are still sceptical about the role that they play and what they can do. How do you combat that, or what advice would you give to that potential young person, young trustee, about fighting that sort of head on, if you like? Alison, if you can answer first, that'd be great.
Okay, I think I would say don't feel intimidated, and I know that's easy for me to say sitting here. Get to know the other trustees. One of the things that we do at the Nspcc is we buddy all new trustees up with an existing trustee. It's a really responsible role for anybody, never mind someone who hasn't done it before. And so we buddy people up, speak to other trustees, feel free to have your say around the board table, and and look for support to those people that are naturally supportive towards you, because most people want to encourage and welcome new trustees, regardless of their age. So get support from those that are supportive. If there's someone in a similar role to me, if there's a board secretary or someone working in governance, go to them. So if there's anything you don't understand, don't be afraid to ask the questions. If you don't understand it, you can guarantee somebody else won't understand it either. Thanks.
Bill, any tips?
Yeah, I think if you've explored those kind of softer routes as well, and if you are genuinely feeling like your contributions are not being valued or taken seriously, then it may also be worth having a look at if there are any behavioural policies for trustees, so things like the code of conduct. It may be worth taking a trusted member of the board aside and asking if you could have a conversation with them, so perhaps the chair, assuming that the incident isn't with the chair, and if it is, then maybe another, maybe the vice chair or similar, and just spend a bit of time crafting a message to them. Just say you'd like to have a conversation, keep things broad, and then have a phone call with them offline, express your concerns, see what their thought and opinion is, and if there's anything they may be able to do to kind of stamp out that behaviour as a leader of a board. And if it goes beyond that, then you can discuss this at board as well. You've got a right to highlight how you feel your contributions are being taken. I think it's important when you do that you really highlight how it's making you feel, because that part of any feedback is indisputable. No one can tell you how a message has landed with you, or how your contributions are how people are responding, how that's making you feel. And it's really important that people know that, and that you feel that you're in a position where you're being encouraged and able to contribute at the board.
Yeah, great. I love all of that. And I think there's something here as well around we've covered this in previous webinars, but some young people who join boards, it will be quite transformative for that charity. So you, and for the people around that board table who need some allowance, I suppose, to be able to come on that learning journey with you, and that actually this is uncomfortable for them because there's someone coming into a space that normally wouldn't be there. And I found that sometimes the skepticism around young trustees is because people don't quite get the value and don't quite understand the argument for having, like Bill said, diversity of age in all senses, and diversity across every, not just protected characteristics, but background and those. Alison, if you, well, and Bill actually, if someone on here is sort of 70% of the way there thinking about, I would like to do this, I'm not sure I can convince the rest of my board, or if someone on here is a member of staff at a charity that really thinks the charity they work for should have young trustees, how would you advise them to go about it? What are the sort of key arguments that you think need to be made to the board to convince them to do this? And I'll start with Alison, but I'll let you have a second just to process the question, because it's a complex question, and say to everybody else watching, if you have a question that you want to ask Bill and Alison, please do let us know, and just put in the chat that you have a question and we'll come around and unmute you. Or if you would like me to ask the question for you, just send me a message privately in the chat and I will do that. But if you do ask a question, I'll bring you in when it kind of naturally allows for it. So Alison, tips from you for people watching this who might be sort of 70% of the way there convinced that young trustees is the right thing to do.
I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's the right thing for all boards to do, because in order to make the right decisions for the organisation, you need to get a perspective from a wide range of backgrounds. I think it's important to say that a young trustee should not be seen as the token representative of all young people. It's about bringing recent lived experience of having, you know, sort of grown up recently in the society within which the charity works, and able to actually inform the rest of the board from that perspective. So I think that's a really key thing. I think in terms of trying to get support for it, there's a number of charities that are certainly further down the road than we are, you know, sort of speak to other charities where there are young trustees, and talk about and try to get to understand what it's brought for them. In a previous job, I was a clerk to a further education college, and we had student trustees, and one of them was really key to a pivotal decision that actually helped to improve an Ofsted grade quicker than it would have done had that person not voiced their opinion at the board table. So if you can find people who've got sort of real evidence of why it's been successful, that should help. Thanks.
Bill, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think if there is any scepticism as to why it's a good idea, I would want people to give me a good, clear reason as to why they feel they can't recruit a young person onto their board. And I would probably, if I'm being honest, I'd be a little bit challenging about that, because I believe that young people are very capable. I work with a high volume of young trustees with my professional role. I probably work with about 30 to 40 student sabbatical trustees per year, the bulk of whom would be an excellent appointment for any charity, who would bring significant amount of governance skills, a significant amount of crisis management skills given the last few months. And if anyone were to overlook them, it would be their loss. So I would really want to know why you're not interested in recruiting a young trustee onto your board, because I know, both in my professional capacity as a recruiter, but also as an ambassador in the young trustee movement, that there are a number of very talented, very capable young people that frankly could add a lot of value to boards and sadly have been overlooked a little bit.
And I think there is a very useful time for me to naturally plug what the Young Trustees movement is trying to do, which is support aspiring young trustees, support existing young trustees, and support organisations that want to come on this journey too. We're not saying that your very first appointment of a young trustee is going to be perfect. As I said earlier, this is about learning and working out what works right for you and your board. And I'm going to go back to the buddy system that Allison brought in, because actually sometimes boards only think of buddying people up or getting mentors when the person they're appointing doesn't look like or have the same experience as everybody else around the room. So you said, Alison, that that's something your board does for everyone. Is it? Can you just tell us a little bit how it works in practice?
Yeah, so what we came to realise was that anyone joining a board or anyone joining a new board is going to face a number of challenges, and the challenges are only going to get bigger and bigger from the situation we're in at the moment for people joining boards. You know, really tough decisions to be made as a result of COVID and the economic impact that it's had. And so what we've always done is when we have had new trustees, we've always linked them to somebody nearby who's an established trustee, who they can speak to, you know, sort of informally and, you know, sort of build a rapport with, to help them, you know, sort of overcome those uncomfortable decisions and understand the situation that the organisation's in.
And for those of you that are watching that are interested in mentoring and mentorship and the importance it plays in making sure people can thrive on board, we held a webinar with Precious Sithole a couple of weeks ago where you can find to your heart's content all the stuff you need about mentors and mentoring. But there's something that I really want to highlight for anyone watching this who is in a position of power in a board to help get young trustees on your board, which is that these processes are good for all new trustees, but often it's a young trustee that kicks off the thinking around that. So I just want to make that absolutely clear that if you don't already encourage your trustees to have board buddies from within the board or mentors from outside the board, whatever, that they are really good things to do. Now, Bill, I wondered if you had any tips to convince a charity that is not a youth sector charity or that doesn't have younger people as its primary service users, because there is something here around youth charities are pretty much the, you know, you're preaching to the converted, and certainly student unions, we know that. How do you bring an organisation like Age UK along on this journey, or an organisation that works with animals and has nothing to do with human beings? How do you bring those on this journey to convince them that young trustees is the right thing for them when it doesn't seem sort of the natural journey for them?
The last time that I checked, age only works in one direction. We only get older. So, you know, just because we might not necessarily be older people ourselves right now, we will be one day. And I'm sure we'll be very interested in how those services are going to be shaped and developed. You know, equally, just, you know, I'm 29. I'm not, you know, but I have people in my life that are important to me that are older. Why would I not be interested in helping to develop and shape services that might affect, I don't know, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, whatever it might be, my friends? You know, why would I not be interested in helping to shape those services in particular? And, you know, everyone loves animals. You know, we want to make sure that, there's a variety of wildlife for our children and our nieces and nephews and everything else to grow up with. So why is that not relevant to young people?
But what about the boards? So that's convincing young people to put themselves forward for trusteeships. But if we were to go to, I don't know the Age UK board, I'm picking on them because it's a very obvious stereotypical organisation to pick on, but I guess you could use any organisation that works with adults, pure and pure. So not the youth sector. What sort of arguments would you be making to them? You mentioned earlier around, you know, lots of young trustees you've come across are great at crisis management because of their SAB roles. But if there's somebody watching this who is the chief exec of an organisation that isn't in the youth sector, what would be your sort of top 3 reasons to recruit young trustees? And Alison, I'll come to you in a moment to answer the same question as well.
Yeah, okay. Again, so I think it's firstly about the quality of decision being made at board level to make sure there is a diversity of thought there. And again, I can't see any reason as to why that would be of value to any board. Secondly, just because you may not be your organisation may not currently be targeting young people, you are at a risk where you may struggle with relevancy in future years if you're not if you're not building the pipeline of interest. And then again, I think the third one there is I wouldn't make any assumptions about what is relevant to anyone at any age. Again, I might not be old, but my parent might be, someone important to me might be, and I would care very deeply about the level of quality of care and service that they got. So that affects me, directly, really. So you don't have to be old for it to affect you still.
Yeah, great. Alison, anything you would add to those that are dubious and not in the youth sector and don't see the natural fittage for this?
Well, the obvious one to me, certainly in terms of older people, is who are the people best placed to support older people, young people, and actually speaking to young people about how they can directly support older people seems to be, sort of obvious benefit.
And there's something here, there's some research out there to support this, although I can't remember where it's from, so I can't quote it. But from what I understand, through the virus, diversity has really been put on the back foot in terms of actual practical diversity and walking the talk. So in terms of actually recruiting different types of people into roles. What would you say to those sorts of people? Why should diversity be front and centre of what we're trying to do, despite the virus? Because people will naturally put things that they see as sort of soft issues on the back foot. What would be your challenge to those?
I think if you look at what's happened recently with Black Lives Matter, we've just had Pride Month. We live in a diverse society. Ensuring that there's diversity across the boardroom can only make sure that we're making the right decisions for a diverse society and for the charity to thrive in that society.
Bill, anything to add?
Other than say I fully agree with Alison, I think my point there would just be that what we have seen as well throughout this crisis is that people from disadvantaged communities, people that maybe from BAME backgrounds, and also younger people are likely to be even more adversely affected by the coronavirus pandemic. So diversity, in my opinion, has got more important, not less.
Great. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And actually, if any argument has played out in this, it's if you have different skill set around the table, different backgrounds, different lived experience, you're always better prepared to slip into that crisis management role. Now, I'm going to bring Jack White in, who has a question to ask. I'm just going to unmute Jack now. Jack.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you very much for putting on this evening. I've got two questions. So I'm a trustee, myself and Pfizer, who's also on the call. We were recently appointed young trustees, probably around September last year for groundwork. And I've felt my experience over the course of the past year. I'm sure, when you're new to boards altogether, it does take like a year before you feel like you're actually being effective. But I was just interested, I'm going to my final year of university, and obviously looking at jobs as well. If there's any more young trustees in the call, how do you talk about your experience as a trustee when you're, say, going for an interview or, going into a career that might not necessarily be in the charity sector? And also, is my second kind of question as well, if there's any examples of younger trustees. I don't really like the term young trustee sometimes, but is there any examples of young trustees who've made a real impact, and if there's any kind of really good success stories, I'd be interested to hear those as well.
Bill, Alison, do you have an answer to either of those? Because I've got an answer, but I don't want to take up the airtime, so I'll let you two go first.
Sure. Alison, do you want to go first, or shall I?
You go first, and I'll come in if I've got anything more to say.
Sure. So in terms of how to use your trustee experience at interview, I would really encourage you to make sure that you're articulating that experience on CV and at interview stage as well, within some of the answers that you might choose to provide on your covering letter or application form, or indeed in person interview. Actually, I think trustee experience is incredibly valuable. As someone who recruits senior leaders into roles, we find increasingly that the chief executives that we appoint, generally speaking, have some trustee experience. I would say it's more common that they do have some trustee experience than what they don't. So you're building up those experiences at a very early point in your career, and those are going to pay you back in dividend over the next couple of years. It's irrespective of what industry you go into. As soon as you go into an organisation which has more than a couple of people, you know, that organisation is going to have committees, it will have working groups, it will have boards, it will have some form of governance, where you're going to have responsibilities around how you make decisions, how you contribute to groups, and you know, you're legally responsible for a charity. So you've got brilliant experience in that way, and you know, you can really sell that as a selling point for you when you're putting your foot in the door and trying to get an opportunity. And best of luck with it. If there's anything I can do to help you with that journey, feel free to get in touch. I think the other thing to say about impact and success at boards, I regularly see young people on boards, particularly it may be due to the nature of work where I am in student union space. Often the younger trustees on that board that are the ones that decide to trigger external reviews of their charity, which often is the correct decision to do. And often does result in improvements to the organisation once they've been through that process. And I think it's perhaps that level of expectation about what an organisation should do. It's about not losing sight of the values that I think sometimes younger people can do particularly well. And the impact of that means that, you know, by going through that process and by holding the organisation to account, I can think of many, many, many examples where young trustees have ultimately left a legacy of a better charity behind them.
Alison, anything you want to add?
I agree with everything Bill said. I mean, I think in terms of, you know, sort of using trusteeship to help you, you know, sort of on your career path. I mean, the things that you can add to any application about, you know, decision making, teamwork and collaboration, making difficult decisions, challenging conversations, all of those things you tend to get asked in any interview for any job. And so being able to pull out experiences that you've had as a trustee can only be helpful.
Great. And Jack and Pfizer, first of all, congratulations on you know, your first year as a trustee, or almost first full year. We did do a session previously which was called What Can You Get From Being a Trustee, which the link will magically appear in the chat box in just a moment. But I advise you to go and watch that, because it does give you some practical tips about how to transfer your experience from the boardroom into the actual workroom, to steal a quote from RuPaul. I think there's something here about, I certainly struggled with that when I was 21. It feels really weird because I almost said your age, which I still feel, I'm only 28, so, but I still feel quite close to 21. I suppose I'm not now, so I take your point when you say young trustees. But there's something there around, one thing I really struggled with was conveying what I could actually do. So there's something in the boardroom where you're operating at such a sort of blue sky level, you know, you're asking strategic questions, you're triggering reviews, but you're not actually doing the review, or you're not actually making the strategic thing that you've asked to happen, because that's the job of the executive. So if I was to give a pep talk to myself back when I was 18, I would have said, yes, build your trustee career, but top and tail that with either some very hands-on volunteering or getting a job somewhere else. And when I was at uni, certainly I had 3 different jobs. I mean, they were all just call center and, just work like that really to get some money in. But I think you have to be able to show what you've actually done that's quite more hands-on than being a trustee and just having your head in the game. It's about what can you do. So I hope that's clear, but essentially I would be using my last year at uni to get as much experience under my belt. And actually, I think you said it was Groundworks where you're a trustee of. They might be able to offer you some opportunities to be able to do that as well. So it's worth asking the chief executive of that organisation if you could spend some time doing different things for them. I think you're right. It absolutely does take a year to get your feet under the table to really start making impact. If you want examples of impact, I would encourage you to look at the Young Trustees Movement Hub, where you will find all of the spotlight stories for the ambassadors, and look back through the webinars, because there are some very practical examples in there of what young trustees have done around the table. One thing I would challenge though about a question like that, I suppose, and I don't know if Bill or Alison agree with me, and in a minute I'll give them a chance to respond, but I think it's a really high threshold to hold a young trustee to, which is what is your personal impact on that board? Because a board is supposed to be a collegiate effort, so as a group you make an impact on the work. I think you can still flag things and you can still start conversations, but sometimes it's really hard to track that impact, because a conversation goes a long way. It could take a year for that conversation to turn into any practical action, and sometimes I think it's harder to remember what that impact is. So as you're exploring the hub, you might find some really concrete examples of I did this, but you might also find people using the words like I contributed to, or I was a part of, or me and the trustees did this. And I think try not to underestimate, I suppose, and this goes for all of us, our role in that, but actually it's about coming together as a board. Bill, Alison, anything to add to that, or a challenge back? Of course, this is the appropriate space.
No, not really. I mean, I think I think people tend to, on boards where, sort of, I think there's more often it's easy to see a negative impact from an individual trustee rather than a positive impact.
I think that's a good thing to share. Bill?
I just think I wouldn't lose sight that sometimes those small comments that you make, or those small inputs that you may have, can lead, it may not seem like it, but in the same sense of things happening over a long term, it can lead to a big wave. And it might be that you just made a few comments on a particular report. It might be that you asked for a bit more information. It might be that you asked the question, why have we reached this decision? Why is this the budget for next year? Can you talk me through it? Sometimes just asking for those things makes a huge difference. I recently asked for some scenarios. Had we planned for one of our assets to be closed during lockdown and everything else? So I just asked the question about the finances effectively. I didn't go and produce a report, and I didn't go and scenario plan for it. I asked the question, the board at the next board meeting, we had the scenarios, and ultimately that led to us having a better decision about what to do going forward. That leads to better governance, and that will lead to better outcomes for the charity. It was a very tiny comment that made a big difference.
And I love that you've remembered that, because the second part to my point is that sometimes you forget to bank these things in your memory about actually, oh, that was me that starts that conversation or whatnot. I've got, Jack, I'll give you a chance to come back in a moment if you wish to. Drop me a message if you do. But I've got a question here from somebody. I'm going to read it out for you, saying, I'm wondering how much effort you would suggest putting in regarding convincing a board to take on young trustees. To rephrase, in the case I'm not being clear, if you are faced with a board who is adamantly against the idea or continuously disregarding your idea, would you suggest being relentless and assertive in trying to get the change that you want, or spend your energy and take your skills elsewhere? I don't know who looks ready to answer. Let's go with Alison.
Goodness, that's a difficult one. I'd like to say be relentless and don't let it drop. Having said that, you could spend years and years doing that. Maybe look elsewhere as well. You know, sort of, otherwise you could, you know, by the time you actually get them to take you seriously, you might not be that young anymore. So I would say, you know, sort of be as relentless as you can, but not to the point where you're just not getting anywhere and you could actually do something better elsewhere.
Thanks. Bill?
Yeah, it's probably the former sabbatical officer in me, but I'm not necessarily sure I would take no for an answer, if I'm being honest. So again, I would be challenging. I would want to know, why are you not prepared to give a young person an opportunity? What is it that you think a good trustee is? What is it that you're expecting from these people? And then I would want to challenge that. And then I might be willing to say, what about if I can find someone who's done that? Would you give them an opportunity? Would you be willing to consider them? You know, what about if we interview, but we have a couple of spaces to just challenge our assumptions? And I think if you're persistent but positive, and you know, you're trying to work out a solution to overcome the skepticism that people have, it's very hard to defend against that.
Yeah, and I would say if you've got some people that are blockers, then go around the blockers and try and win champions off gradually. So if you can get 1, 2, 3, 4 trustees to do it and champion it on your behalf in the boardroom, that's much more powerful than it coming from the person that's trying to get onto the board. So I realise that we all sort of want to be standing there with our pitchforks saying, let me in. But actually, until you're on the other side of the door, inviting people in, that can be really hard. So I would say, try and find your champions on that board who can navigate this for you, who can sort of try and win the hearts and minds. And if any trustee is sceptical about the power and the impact and the sorts of people that put themselves forward for young trustees, tell them to sign up to the Young Trustees Hub, do a bit of research, and they'll realise the sort of awesome things that younger professionals and people have done as they enter their trustee career. Now, I have a question here from Philippa. I'm just going to unmute Philippa and see if she wants to turn camera on to ask a question about trustee terms. Philippa.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
This is Wurzel Gummidge. I've been out in the garden and it's still raining. Right. I fortunately have persuaded the board to take on a young trustee. It has taken persistence. And what I found was that local events, things happening within the charity is actually encouraged that to happen. One of the main things was actually saying to the trustees, okay, who's going to be running your sports clubs in the future? Who's going to be running the town council? Who's going to be running the guides? And it all sounds very small stuff, but at the moment it's all people over 45. And it actually brought it home to them. It really did. And my question is, now that I'm in this fortunate position, is we will be changing our governing scheme so we can incorporate a young trustee, is that we thought that our 4 and 5 year tenure would be too daunting for someone who's 2021. And we were looking at a year, 2 year, with obviously the young trustee would be able to renew that if they wished. But listening to Jack saying that he's only finding his feet after a year, I'm not quite sure what to do now.
It's a great question, and I'm going to go to Bill first.
Yeah, okay. So I'm on my second trusteeship. My first one was linked to my position as a sabbatical officer, so it was for a year and it got renewed by default of becoming elected again. The trusteeship I have now is a 4 year term, and it has an option for a second 4 year term. I think I would suggest keeping the flexibility. I don't think it has to be one or the other. Have a conversation with the appointee about how long they might want and what they might give to it. I think your comment as well about, how long people may be involved. One thing I would also think about is you know, the trustee that you appoint today, if they're a young person, maybe starting out in their career, boards need to be having they need to be recruiting for potential, and they need to be able to ask, where might this person be in 5 years? Where might they be in 6 years, 7 years, or even 8 years? Because one thing that boards do think about is, you know, they want to get those high profile appointments, people doing the amazing things right then and there, but where are they going to be in 8 years? Or, you know, if they serve 2-4 year terms, are they still going to be in that post? Are they still going to be as relevant as they were? So, you know, having that pipeline and having that talent that can be developed, you might get access to someone who could go on and achieve even greater things than some of the people that you might be able to appoint who are readily available, I suppose, as well. So, you know, there are advantages to having a longer term for younger people too. So I think it's a conversation you have with your appointee.
That's great, Bill. Thanks for that. Alison, any more remarks before I come back to Philippa?
Yeah, we're going out on the basis of our trustees do 3-year terms, and the young trustee, we're going out on the basis that it would be an initial term of 3 years. And, you know, sort of, I think it's good to be flexible as long as that doesn't end up being used against the young trustee, because, you know, someone's not happy with the position, and, you know, sort of that can be used to manoeuvre them out. That would be a caution. But I also think, you know, sort of, we always go out for, you know, looking for trustees for 3 years terms. Not everyone can actually fulfil that. So, you know, sort of, I'm not convinced that there's a need to make it different for a younger person, and just accept, you know, sort of changes that might naturally happen to any trustee.
I think that's really good sort of yellow amber flag there of caution, which is actually, if young trustees have a different term to everyone else, you automatically create an us and them culture. And I think it's really important to try and avoid that at every stage. And to Bill's point, ask the young trustee, because you don't, as long as the chair knows when that person's stepping down, so you can do some succession planning, it doesn't really matter what term they agree to, because you could have a trustee agree to 10 years and they drop off after 6 months. That could just be the reality of it. So I think there's something there, and actually to help people get up to speed faster, I still think it takes a year anyway for any trustee to really get to grips with that organisation. But things like having a board buddy, a proper full induction, a recruitment pack that takes them on the journey that you need it to take them on, even briefing webinars before they apply, a bit like this, all of that will help speed that process up, or at least get them to feel like they can run faster. That would be my closing tip on that. I've got one last question I want to bring in, and we're very close to time. So Philippa, do you want to say anything in return? No? Okay, great.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philippa. Our final question of today comes from Dan Laws, who I am unmuting and allowing video to start now. Dan, over to you.
Hi, Leon. Thank you so much, and brilliant session. Thank you for holding it. You know, my question is, obviously, young trustees are a fantastic place to start, but do you think that there's potential, once a young trustee is on board, to almost allow that young trustee to have a bit of an analysis of the organisation as a whole, the charity as a whole, and look at how you can almost promote youth voice within the structures of that organisation? So I think you often look at, for example, a board, and you know, look at how you can bring young people there, but it's often the other structures within a charity, which I think, you know, which go very down to the grassroots level, which often need a proper looking at. And I think that's where young trustee could definitely be useful. But do you think there's a potential for that?
Great question. Let's go to somebody who is living and breathing governance all day, every day. Alison.
I think there is an opportunity for, or there should be an opportunity for all trustees to get to have a good, you know, so a good understanding of how the organisation works across the organisation. Obviously, there's a need to balance that with the, you know, sort of not getting involved in day-to-day management of the organisation. I think there's a potential danger there. But yes, certainly, you know, sort of we're looking at involving young people more across our organisation. We're also developing a youth advisory board, which our young trustee will chair and will be the linchpin between the youth advisory board and the main board. But we're also looking at ensuring that there's wider groups of young people involved across the organisation in all of our decision making. And so that, yes, there would certainly be an opportunity for young trustee to get involved with that. And that's the way it should be it should be possible for all, a diverse range of charities to get to really understand how the charity works and how it could work better.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I think the way that I might structure that as a recommendation would be that obviously the board needs to, the overall trustee board needs to remain operating at a strategic level. However, there are opportunities in the board to make a recommendation for like a people and culture committee, or to start an action working group, for example, around a particular topic. And I think there are probably some relevant avenues from that method that you could do, that could look at culture, could make sure that the rest of the organisation's got inclusive practice within it, and that is still a relevant strategic topic. And I think by establishing a separate group for it, there may already be one in existence. It would also make sure that issue got the appropriate level of time that it would need, because I don't think it would otherwise get the right amount of airtime at board level necessarily, because obviously there's a packed agenda at board already.
Great, thanks, Bill. Dan, do you want to come back on that, or?
Well, good. I'm very aware of the time. I won't keep everyone longer, but no, that was absolutely fantastic.
And that is the right answer. So we are now at 1918, which means we are 3 minutes over the first time we've ever ended, just slightly over time, which I credit our guests with, because it's been so interesting and has taken a really interesting journey through that. I want to say a big thank you to both Bill and Alison for joining us today, and to everyone on the webinar for asking questions or sitting there and watching what's going on. Do join us again next week, same time, same place, where we will be looking at creating a job advert and interview process. The guests for that are Mita, who is the Programme Manager for the Young Trustees Movement, and Milo Jasper, who is Chair of the Young Fabians Health Network, and I am told we'll be talking about the lack of disabled trustees at boards, bearing in mind that young trusteeship is intersectional, so we do want to hear about other elements of diversity too, and disabled trustees are poorly lacking in the charity sector, so it should be a really interesting one. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next week. A big thank you to Alison and Bill once more, and have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Thank you.